Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, where he's been proactively working towards drugs and food regulation, medical education, and implementation of the Pradhan Mantri Swasthya Suraksha Yojana, which is now also setting up aims, which are being set up across the country. You can imagine he was doing all of this really important work during COVID. He was also involved in the administration expansion of institutes such as AIMS Delhi, PGI Chandigarh, and JIPMER in Pondicherry. He's been closely associated with reforms in the medical education over the last 2 years, led the successful implementation of NEET. Key priority area for him has been to ensure transparency in medical admissions by way of making common counseling mandatory. He's been associated with the National Medical Commission Bill from drafting the final stage, as well as the allied healthcare professional bills. He's completed his BTech and MTech from IIT Kanpur in electrical engineering, so an engineer by training. He brings with him a rich and varied experience of administrative work in diverse areas: petroleum, natural gas, industrial development, rural development, agriculture, marketing, health, family welfare. During COVID pandemic, as you know, it's brought human health in the center of our conversation, and inconceivable that the absence of safe and wholesome food will be missing. After he took over as the CEO of FSSAI in the middle of the pandemic and having moved from the Ministry of Health, he's probably best placed to take over the reins as FSSAI. On behalf of PAFI, I'd like to welcome him and the FSSAI team for their unstinted support to our members, their companies during the pandemic, and to ensure that citizens in our country remained fed and hydrated. Ladies and gentlemen, food, as you know, is by far the most important part of our life. While many of our members in PAFI are either food producers or beverages producers or associated in the supply chain or distribution or technological solution of the food ecosystem, each one of us is a consumer of food, and I cannot emphasize enough the relevance of today's dialogue. There's been some extraordinary improvisations in the regulation and governance of FSSAI in the food manufacturers, such as e-inspections of the facilities extensively using digital technology. The signature food safety and training FOSTAC program has trained a large number of food handlers in the value chain. In today's discussion, we hope Singhal will also discuss the various initiatives taken by FSSAI to democratize the idea of food safety in the country and the role we all can play in that effort. With Ishtaq, he's going to discuss some pertinent questions. I think we would largely like to hear his views on many areas, including EODB, the multiple notifications sometimes that we have to deal with, sometimes the process of consultation and how that can be improved, and other spaces which the industry is usually engaging with. I'd also hope that we can discuss how to improve state lab infrastructure and upgrade the analysis skill, etc. Mr. Singhal, let me take a minute to introduce PAFI to you before we invite you for your keynote in today's interactive. PAFI started in 2008 as an informal platform for public policy professionals. In 2012, it was registered in the Societies Act, and today PAFI has over 80 members, Indian and foreign, as its members, and associations across sectors. We're at the forefront of driving ethical, transparent, and evidence-based interaction amongst government, industry, media, academy, and other stakeholders in the economy. Given your very important role, sir, at FSSAI, not just as a regulator of food and beverages and issues related to that, but also its wider impact on every individual and family day-to-day basis, the importance at this particular time. We are very fortunate to have you here. The format of the dialogue is that we will request you, sir, to give a keynote for about 15-20 minutes as you feel fit, and then my colleague Ishtaq will moderate a Q&A session for about 30 to 40 minutes. We have several delegates who have already joined. They're sending in their questions, and as those questions keep coming in, depending on the time available, we will start putting those questions to you. With this, Mr. Singhal, may I request you to kindly start your keynote address, followed by questions by Ishtaq.
Thank you, Mr. Bhatia. That was a very generous introduction. I think more than what I deserved. So grateful to you for that. And let me suggest a small modification in the scheme of things that you are saying. First of all, I'm sorry for the delay. There was a meeting which came up unexpectedly. I couldn't really help it. So I've come directly from that meeting. So if I have kept you waiting, I'm very extremely sorry for that. We are starting late, I'm aware of that. So it's always a pleasure to interact with the industry or with consumer groups, because no regulator can regulate in a vacuum. We listen to you, we learn from you, we understand problems from you, and therefore we regulate because of you. You give a feedback, which is very, very important. So it's always very important, and it's a pleasant experience to interact with the industry or with consumers. And therefore, I would not like to give you a lecture or any keynote address. Basically, I would like to interact more and more. We would like to spend time, even if it is more than 1 hour, I don't mind. We can sit together for 2 hours. I have all the time in the world. I don't want to waste it by giving a lecture. So I just want to say very briefly that FSSAI is a regulator which is a very recent. We have become a teenager just now. We were actually started operations in 2008. So we are a teenager and a young regulator. And being a young regulator, I think the mindset is slightly different from the traditional old regulators whom you see in the country. We believe a lot in the industry. We have faith in you. We believe that the food industry would like to serve good food. It is in its own interest to serve good food. Therefore, there's no need for heavy-handed regulation in the food sector. That is our inherent belief. And we would really request you to help us keep that faith, that heavy-handed regulation is not required at all. The industry would self-regulate. Therefore, we have simple provisions like compliance testing of samples twice a year. Everybody is expected to do that. We are soon coming out with a perpetual license regime in which the license would be perpetual. There would be no need to renew the license after 3 or 5 years, and only an annual report will have to be filed. We have a system of third-party audits, wherein if you get a good score of 80% or above, then no inspector will visit you. It is our desire not to visit you unless we are forced to. So we would love to stay in our homes and not visit you. If you can go for third-party audits and get a 80% score in that, or for food establishments, you can get a hygiene rating score of 5 stars, we will be content not to come to you at all. So go for that kind of third-party auditing, go for compliance testing, go for fast-track training of your food handlers. Please go for observing all the good manufacturing practices which are there in the licensing regulation. As long as you do all these things, even the inspection regime in the future, we are developing currently a RBIS, risk-based inspection system, which is somewhat analogous to what we have for imports. We have a RMS for imports. So this RBIS would keep track of food businesses, whether they are filing their annual reports or not, what is the state of compliance, whether they have been found to be lacking or wanting in any inspection. What is the kind of product they are manufacturing? Is it a high-risk product or a low-risk product? And then this RBIS would actually throw up names of FBOs for inspection through Phosphorus. So in the future, even inspections would be risk-based. And if you are running your business in a manner where the risk is minimal, you are observing all precautions, all good manufacturing practices, there's nothing found wrong, then probably you will not come up in the list for inspection at all. So we'll keep our peace, you keep your peace. And please help us keep our faith in you. Don't break that faith. That is all I have to say. In the beginning, I want to say only this much. So we believe in you. We'll keep on doing that. Let us straight away. There are some officers. Dr. Oberoi is there. He is the person who handles quality assurance in our organization. Mr. R.K. Mittal is there, yes, who handles RCD. And I believe Dr. Amit Sharma also should be there. I can't see him in the participants. He is the person who handles imports. Dr. Amit Sharma, are you there?
Mr. Mittal is there. We saw his name.
Mr. Mittal is there.
Mr. Oberoi.
Dr. Oberoi is there.
Dr. Oberoi is there.
Amit Sharma doesn't seem to be there. So anyway, so I'll propose that I don't lecture you anymore, and please let's go to the question and answer session. We'll interact with all the persons who are present. We would love to listen to you, what kind of problems you have, what we can do to solve them. So over to you, Mr. Ishtiyaq Amjad.
Thank you so much. Before I give it to Shri, this is the best kind of dialogue, short and sweet. आपने बिल्कुल सारे points कर दिए वहाँ पे, and you've addressed everything. And आपने light-handed regulation का भी हवाला दे दिया और FSSAI की जवानी का भी हवाला दे दिया.
We are almost at the same age, sir. PAFI and FSSAI almost 12 years old. So it's good to interact with contemporaries.
Our members are delighted. So thank you so much for doing that. And this is a role model for how our interaction should go. I'm going to hand over to Ishtiaq. Thank you, Ji.
The only shortcoming of this dialogue is that my job is increased now from 30 minutes to 45 minutes. So it's a bit of an additional job that you put on me, sir, but really appreciate you coming here. I don't know, many of our members may or may not be aware, but in last 12 years, the journey of Food Safety and Standards Authority has been incredible. I was telling the non-food sector members in PAFI, sir, that before the Food Safety Authority, the name of the regulator was PFA, Prevention of Food Adulteration. So the name itself suggested that you will adulterate and I will prevent. So from there to today, the light-handed regulation, as you're talking about, is really, is a music to ear. In fact, I will open up the session. I really encourage all our members to send in the live questions, but there were some questions that has come before, sir. One of the, there was this series of questions on the ease of doing business. And one of them, which many of us across the food sector have faced, is the front of pack labeling issue, sir, because what happens typically is that I can see the smile on your face. Typically what happens that it's not the Food Safety and Standards Authority alone that governs that. So we have the legal metrology. Sometimes BIS comes up with the new regulations and things like that. And this is, if there's one bone of contention between the industry and the regulators, I guess this is probably one of the biggest challenges. And before joining Godrej, we have interest in foods, which is a limited one through our frozen snacks business, and of course feed, which is now being governed by the Food Safety and BIS. Almost a decade and a half that I spent in the food sector. So this has been the biggest challenge. How much of the inventory we have left with the new changed front of the pack labeling norms that has come? How do we exhaust that? We continue to seek extensions after extensions from FSSAI and other regulators. So what's your take on that, sir? I mean, is there a way where we could probably look at combining all of this and really, have one rollout across the different departments of the regulators and government, sir?
Sir, if I may just, before we answer that question, if I may just, because just yesterday we were in a meeting with Ministry of Consumer Affairs on the same issue of labeling. And what we sort of pointed to them, and I'll just extend the point that Ishtiaq is making, which is that over the last 30 years, the space on the, I'm from Apple, so I'll speak about electronics a little bit. The boxes have become smaller. The first mobile phone, sir, if you remember, वो अगर पैर पे गिर जाए तो at least fracture तो होता था toe में. It was the size of the whiskey bottle के size का उसका डब्बा आता था. Now it is this little box that is available, right? So the space on the box is reducing in several sectors, and the label size and what is required mandatorily is increasing, and then more ministries are coming in, environment, BIS. How do we, as all of or whole of government approach, solve this? If you could, in addition to FSCI, how do we approach this holistically as a government to kind of look at what is mandatory, what should be there, and what can we review this entire thing in consumer interest, of course, and ease of doing business for them. So balancing that. Thank you.
Okay, so let me try to answer these queries. There are actually two ways we could do this. Either we could note down all the questions and then reply at the end. That way everybody gets an opportunity to present his question. Or we could go question by question and have a discussion on each question. So I don't really know what works better for you. I'll answer this question to the extent possible, and then we'll, I think, note down all the questions and go for a response at the end. I think that will be simpler.
Sure.
So as far as labeling goes, I think first of all I have to confess that we are culprits in this because we've been changing labeling requirements too often. And this was not happening only with labeling. I found that we were changing the food standards also too often. So after I took over, we have taken a decision now that we'll club various amendment proposals which come to the Food Authority and send them to the Ministry for approval only 2 times a year, so that there'll be no more than 2 changes every year. That is one. Secondly, as a matter of rule, we always give at least 6 months time for implementation of any new provision. So that system is there. and combined with the process where we'll send only proposals to the government only 2 times a year, I think there will be some relief. Thirdly, as far as the various labeling changes are concerned, since there was a multiplicity and plethora of labeling changes, we decided to club all of them and shift the rate of implementation of all of them to 1st of July 2022. In the food sector, we have done this. So whatever changes had been made in various different regulations, they've all been combined together and they're all being operationalized from 1st of July only, so that there is no change frequently. That has been done. But having said that, you spoke about BIS and you spoke about LM, legal metrology. About BIS, BIS is a very old organization, and you mentioned the PFA era when FSSAI was not there at all. There was no food regulator specifically, it was only PFA. PFA actually was an act, it was not an organization. So at that point of time, BIS did have many standards. They had done excellent work in having standards. Now, BIS is a general regulator. They don't regulate only food. And secondly, BIS, everything which is done by BIS is non-mandatory. It is not mandatory inherently. Mm-hmm. It has to be made mandatory by some ministry or some department by passing a control order. So there were some control orders for food products issued before FSSAI came into being. And some of them have been carried over. So now for all these 744 food products which are there in the country, BIS standards are mandatory only for some. Sure, that's right. Which is milk powders, etc., drinking water, packaged drinking water. There are some very small number of categories where BIS is also mandatory. Now, when we say it is mandatory, what we mean is that their standards are mandatory. And then therefore, there's a question of aligning our standards to their standards, which is a continuous process. We keep on doing that. Both the regulators talk to each other. There have been proposals in the past to do away with the IAS certification, because now there's a full regulator in the food sector and there's no point in having multiple regulators. So this issue has been discussed with AgMark also and with BIS also. And over the past few years, last year, in fact, we did away with some products for AgMark, so that AgMark is not required now for as many products as it was required earlier. And we had proposed a similar thing to BIS also, but BIS is somewhat reluctant to let go of the products it is handling right now in conjunction with FSSAI. But even then, if BIS is also present, what we tell BIS is that you are there for standards, and therefore you go and inspect units before you grant a license, and therefore you look at the process also, which is very well. We don't do that normally unless there's a high risk business. We don't do that. So please do all that, but then please don't come out with changing for labeling. That's right. The standards have to be followed. You may go and inspect the premises, look at the facilities which are there. All that is absolutely fine. That is BIS's goal. But please don't get into labeling, because we have regulations for labeling. So that we have taken up with BIS in the past also. We'll keep on taking up with them in the future also. As far as legal metrology is concerned, it is not confined to food alone. So there will be weights and measures which will be applicable to food also. There will be labeling requirements of LM which are applicable to foods also. So they are a all-encompassing, overarching regulator. And their regulations would apply to everybody. So how do I explain? Suppose you have a restaurant. Then food is not the only license you'll have to obtain for the restaurant. There'll be fire safety, there'll be municipal authorities, there'll be many regulations, laws which impinge upon you. There's nothing in the country or in the world indeed which is regulated only by one regulation. Everything is regulated by multiple regulations, and they come into play for different reasons. So legal metrology will be there, whether we like it or not, and their requirements would be there. If there's some major issue with legal metrology regulations, we can take up with the Consumer Affairs Ministry, and with the that can be taken up, and we can try to rationalize to the extent possible. But they would be there. There's no doing away with legal metrology. For labeling, they would always be there. With BIS, yes, we have a constant dialogue saying that they should not be posing labeling requirements. Now, about the space on the box, yes, mobile phones are getting smaller, but food items, I don't really know whether they're getting smaller. We eat the same amount of food by and large as we used to earlier. And if at all, I see portions getting bigger, and we're going the American way where everything is bigger. So this may not really be. What is true for Apple may not be true for Domino's. And so some food products do have enough space. But then as the amount of space starts getting reduced, our labeling regulations take care of that. So if you have less than 30 square centimeters label space, there's a different set of things to print. Many things are exempted. So 100 to 500, there would be some font sizes specified. 500 square centimeters and above would be a different font size. So the labeling regulations do take into account the amount of label space you have, and they're tailor-made accordingly. So that is a provision we already have in food items. Of course, there are problems at times. CII came to us, the industry bodies came to us that we have tried to fit everything using the font size that you have specified. It's not possible to fit them.
Not possible.
We said, okay, come and show us an example. So they came and they tried to print everything and showed us it is not possible. And then when we saw, then we also were convinced naturally. Our scientific panel was convinced. And so changes were allowed, which is one of the reasons why we shifted the implementation date to 1st of July 2022. But then if somebody is saying something logical, then our scientists, our panels, in FSSAI, there's it's a transparent process of making regulations, which is prescribed in our act. And there are scientific panels. There are 21 scientific panels comprising of 11 scientists each. They're all scientific people of eminence. So everything has to pass through them, and they look for evidence-based arguments. If you say something, they'll ask you to provide evidence. And so sometimes it happens that industry comes with a demand which is not substantiated by any kind of evidence, any shelf life study or rancidity study or whatever. This all data is not provided. Then the panel does refuse to get swayed by their arguments. They say this is only a wish list, will not exceed to a wish list. But if a thing is presented logically, then they invariably agree and they listen to reason. So if there's any problem with font sizes or any such thing, industry does raise it. We normally have representation of the All India Food Processor Association on our food authority. We have CII, and so they do come and raise points. But problems which are there can be rectified. No regulation is cast in stone. It's all dynamic. It keeps on evolving, and we listen to you, as I said, learn from you and change things. So if there's a problem, please let us know. About FOPL, first of all, FOPL, there's no proposal right now before anybody. We've had discussions, we've had stakeholder consultations so far, that is the only thing. But on a philosophical level, if you look at the principles involved in FOPL, I think even you as parents would agree, or as consumers of food would agree, that people do have a right to understand what they are eating. Nobody is saying that you should not have a samosa or a gulab jamun or a pizza. Nobody is saying that. We can never be prescriptive. A consumer will have whatever he wants to have. But then taking away the right of understanding what he is having from him is not a good idea.
That's right.
So the whole problem is, how do we tell the customer or the consumer in a very simple fashion what he is having? And all surveys tend to reveal that decisions to purchase food items are taken in split seconds. Nobody spends a pleasant 15 minutes to turning over the packet, looking at the back of the packet, reading everything, making calculations, and then deciding what to have. It is done in 2 or 3 seconds. People decide, yes, this is looking good, I'll purchase this. So if you're spending only a few seconds on purchasing a food item, then how do you explain within a few seconds what is the inherent intrinsic nature of the food product? So studies all over the world have indicated that if you have interpretive front of pack labeling, which indicates the healthiness or otherwise of a product, it does help in nudging consumers towards healthier products. Right. So if I have a samosa, then I will think, okay, I had a samosa which was slightly heavy. I had something fried today. Now let me go for simpler food the rest of the day, so that the bouquet of food that I have over the whole day is balanced. But then to do this, I should know that a samosa is heavy in fats, it is fried, and it has a lot of calories. So the intention here is only to provide information in a simple manner which can be understood. So there was no consensus on this. We had come out with a draft regulation in 2019, which never saw the light of the day. It was not finally notified because there was no consensus. And then we looked at the WHO recommendations about FOPL. Now, Codex also has come out with guidelines on Codex very recently. And all the guidelines seem to indicate that there should be government-led stakeholder consultations, several consultations, and then there should be a survey of consumers to find out what they want. So we decided to go for stakeholder consultations. We had consultations with the industry and with consumer groups and with experts. And there were 6 rounds of consultations. In the sixth round, there was reasonable consensus on everything. For instance, we decided to go for saturated fats, not total fats. We decided to go for total sugar, not added sugar. We decided to go for sodium, not salt. And we decided to go for per 100 gram or per 100 ml instead of serve size, because serve sizes are not standardized. We decided to go for a smaller number of categories, which then was notified earlier, because consumers want an absolute comparison of products. If I have A type of product which is all very unhealthy and B type of product which is all very healthy, then I would like to see these at two different ends of the spectrum. Unhealthy ones there and healthy ones here. There may be minor differences between the unhealthy ones and minor differences between the healthy ones. But the fact that these are healthy and these are unhealthy should never be lost sight of. So you can't have thresholds which are tailor-made to specific products. And therefore, even unhealthy products may appear to be nice products because something is better out of those unhealthy ones. That should never happen. So the comparison has to be absolute. Therefore, having 29 categories, 28 categories of thresholds is not a good idea. We agreed to have a smaller number of categories. All this was decided, but the only point of contention which remained was that the industry was saying we want to have monochrome GDA, and consumer groups were saying we want to have warning labels. So the decision we took at that time, with everybody's agreement, was that we should go for a consumer survey on Indian consumers to be conducted by some institution of excellence like IAS, and we would all go along with what the concerned selected institution says. So this was recorded, and then we approached IIM Ahmedabad, we approached IIM Bangalore. IIM Bangalore said, we can't really do the survey for you. You'll have to do the survey yourself. We can't do it for you. Then we'll interpret the results. IIM Ahmedabad agreed to do the survey also. So we asked IIM Ahmedabad to do everything. They actually talked to 20,500 consumers. It is the largest survey of this kind in the entire world. Only second closest survey I've seen is about 12,800 or so consumers. But this is the largest survey of its kind. And after the survey, they came up with the recommendation that the health star rating system, if we are looking for, we asked them two questions. One, which form of FOPL is easy to understand? And two, which has the potential to change consumer behavior? So they said easiest to understand is star rating.
Star rating.
People are somewhat familiar with that. And as far as the potential to change behavior is concerned, all of them, all the 5 models they studied have the potential to change behavior. But MTL seems to be the best in changing behavior marginally. However, if you combine both the questions together, then they said HSR is the best format. So we had another meeting after that. All the same stakeholders got together, and there was a discussion on this. The consumer groups were not in agreement with the findings of IIM Ahmedabad. They still wanted to go for warning labels. The industry was by and large in agreement with this. They said we respect IIM Ahmedabad is a respected institution. They've conducted a study and we will go by the findings of the study. So the point we decided, the decision we took was that since the consumers themselves have spoken, and 20,000 of them, rural, urban, men, women, educated, uneducated, high earning group, low earning group, everybody has spoken. It's been analyzed by IIM Ahmedabad. So when we have direct feedback from the consumers, then if the consumer groups have some other point of view, we can't substitute their point of view for what the wisdom of the consumers themselves. So we have decided to go ahead with the HSR rating system. Now that system, I don't know how much detail you want to understand in this. Is it a topic of interest to all of you?
Very helpful. This is very helpful. In fact,
you want to know more about it?
No, this is good enough.
Okay.
So in fact, what I was thinking, sir, what we can do is, instead of just going through all the questions, I'll try and block them in categories, and then it'll be easy for you to then, once you've given us a elaborate answer like this, then it largely covers the entire thing. So as we stand today, sir, the FSSAI has decided to go ahead with the HSR system, the Health Star rating, based on the feedback that it has received directly from the consumer, and which is acceptable to the industry. Is that the net of the FOP label?
Yes, that is true. But then beyond the format itself, there are many other questions to be answered, which our scientific panel is looking at right now.
Yes.
The question of thresholds, the number of categories, whether the optional part of the HSR actually has 2 parts. If you look at the original Australian regulation, there are 4 steps actually in HSR. The star itself is absolutely mandatory. If you go for HSR, then you have to put the star there. That is mandatory. Apart from the star, there are 3 other tiers which are given in the regulation, which are nutrient specific labeling also. So in its full form, HSR looks like a star with a appendage with it, which has 4 columns for nutrition, specific nutrients. So that is also something which the panel is examining. If we have a voluntary nutrient specific display also, then should that be per serve based or per 100 ml or per 100 gram based? Because on the back of the pack, you'll have per serve contribution to RDA. That would be there from 1st of July.
That's right.
So either we use that same thing and put that on the front of the label in a graphical form as a voluntary thing. In which case the star itself would be on the basis of 100 grams or 100 ml. But the nutrient specific labels would be on the basis of per serve. One option could be to do that. The other could be, well, to look at the percentage of RDA per 100 gram or 100 ml and put that graphically on the front of the pack as an optional thing. In which case, on the back of the pack, you'll have per serve contribution to RDA. On the front, you will have per 100 gram contribution to RDA, which will be different figures. So what is more confusing for the consumer? What is better? I think the panel is looking at that. We'll take a call on such issues. But yes, broadly, we are going ahead with HSR. Yes.
Ishtiaq, may I just ask a supplementary, if you don't mind?
This is the last supplementary I'm allowing you.
Because I think we can learn a lot from this. Our industry can learn a lot from, and this is one of the advantages of having, colleagues on this dialogue, which may not be in foods or beverages, but can learn. So this survey was conducted by IIM Ahmedabad themselves, or did they hire how did they just, a little bit, if you can just in 2 minutes, how was it done? Because I think we can all learn on how to do this.
They hired an agency called Dexter to do this.
Okay. So if you need to know more in your office, who will be able to give us more information in your office? Who can reach out to?
Well, you can speak to Dr. Bhaskar, who's the advisor science and standards, or to Inoshi Sharma, who's the executive director compliance strategy. But the IIM Ahmedabad report is available on our website. All the minutes are available on our website.
Excellent.
So for these things, you don't have to go anywhere at all.
Okay.
And there are some people who have been asking questions to the professors who conducted this study. Professor Arun and Professor Ranjan Ghosh have conducted this study. So they're also at IIM Ahmedabad. We have been talking to them. That is also a possibility. Now that the survey is over, everybody is free to talk to them. While the survey was going on, we strictly requested them not to talk to the industry, not to talk to the consumer groups, not even to talk to us. We said, you are free, you are on your own. We have just posed 2 questions to you. Now you are experts, you design the survey yourself, carry out the survey and give us the final result. So that was a period when we allowed nobody to interact with them. Now, of course, they are available and they have their own constraints of time. They're busy people, they're professors, but you're free to contact them also.
Thank you so much.
So actually, sir, 2 Apple has changed the course of the human civilization. One, of course, is the Newton, and second is Virat Bhatia's Apple. So we don't talk about the other Apple anymore, which is the Apple we should be talking in the Food Safety Authority, the quality of eatable apple. But nonetheless, so there's one more question, which a couple of our members have asked. As you know, that there's this entire regulation on the single-use plastic, and food packaging, of course, is a major majorly impacted by that. But one of the immediate problem that we are facing is the straw, because that is classified as a SUP, and obviously then it will be banned in next 6 months' time. Or I think it's 1 year or 6 months. July 1, 2022. So how is the food grade straw or the packaging or any standard of that areas really progressing?
You see, the basic restriction on using recycled plastics in food packaging came from the plastic waste management rules of the Ministry of Environment and Forest, which stipulated that no recycled plastics can be used for food packaging.
That's fine.
Now, we were repeatedly told that almost 40% of the plastic waste in the country comes from the food sector.
That's right.
So we had a very large footprint in the plastics usage. And therefore, we wanted to do something about it. Now, one issue was the question of recycling plastics, going for a circular economy in a general fashion. I think to some extent that was being done, and all the industries are aware of the responsibilities. But the second issue was of the reduction of virgin plastic use in the food sector. We wanted to focus on reducing the use of virgin plastic.
That's right.
And therefore, recycled plastics for food products was a priority for us.
Mm-hmm.
So we sent a proposal to the Environment Ministry. I spoke to the Secretary Environment and Forest, the then Secretary. And ultimately, we were able to get the plastic waste management rules modified, I think in October or November last year, wherein they allowed the use of recycled plastics for food. Now, once they have done that, then it is up to the food authority to come out with standards for recycled plastic. So there are scientific panels had a look at what is being done all over the world. And what we found, and we are open to inputs from all of you on this, was that the only kind of recycled plastic which is allowed for food products in the world is rPET. And there's nothing else. And the standards for recycled PET are almost the same as virgin PET. So PET has this beautiful thing about it that it can be recycled and then it can come up to the same standards again. So that is already being done all over the world. So as the first step, we immediately operationalized our amendment of regulations and we put out these guidelines for rPET. I think BIS also is amending its own standards accordingly. They're on the job. So rPET can be used for food products. And we expect to see an impact immediately in terms of reverse vending machines for PET bottles set up by industries. I mean, I was in Frankfurt and I found that I had to pay a huge amount for a water bottle because most of it was a refundable security deposit. The price of the water was not so high. I had to pay a large amount. I was told if you come back and return the bottle, you'll get the remaining money. So, I mean, 90% of the cost was the deposit which I paid. So they had a very strong incentive system for returning bottles, for bringing back bottles. Those kinds of things can happen very easily in our country. So rPET is already allowed. Now, apart from rPET, for any other multi-layer packaging, polymer, nothing else has been polypropylene, etc. We are not allowed anything for the moment. If there are some standards all over the world by any other regulator where other kinds of plastics have been allowed in the food sector, we'll be very, very happy to receive input from all of you about that. So that is what we have done. Now, the straw issue, of course, is with the Environment Ministry. I was approached by some people, the Beverages Association to be specific, saying that they want input from FSSAI. So I said, why would they want input from FSSAI? I spoke to them. They said, no, we are not seeking any input from FSSAI. We are examining the issue. We'll examine the issue on our own. If we need any input from you, we'll tell you. So the matter rests there, and the issue has to be pursued with the Ministry of Environment and Forest, not with us.
Got it. So the other question is around nutraceuticals. So this is Prabhat Jain from Abbott, I think. He's saying that FSSAI recently released a draft nutraceutical regulations with immediate operationalization. Does it mean that these regulations in draft form will be enforced with immediate effect, or the industry has a choice to follow these new regulations?
Yes, they are in force from the 1st of April. And but I must clarify why they are in force. As I said, normally we give a lot of time before we operationalize anything at all. It is in force from the 1st of April because the earlier modified regulations were coming in force from the 1st of April. And they had created some problems. About the complicated drafting of the regulations. I think the nutraceutical regulation was the most complex regulation drafted by all of us. And we were very, very unhappy with it. It was highly problematic to understand. So there was a need to simplify and rationalize. There was no change, no substantive change. But there was a need to rationalize the format of the nutraceutical regulation. So that is one thing which has been done. It does not lead to any change. Therefore, there's no problem in operationalizing. It's only simpler syntax. The second thing was that some formats, like tablets and capsules, had not been allowed in some categories. This was creating issues for the industry. And this change had come about 1.5 years ago. For the past 1.5 years, they had been agitating against this. So that also has been rationalized now in this regulation, and they have been allowed. So whatever has been done basically has been done at the behest of the industry to facilitate the industry and to rationalize the language, simplify the language of the regulation. So it's old things, in a new clothing. There's no change really speaking.
Okay. Then there are questions around the testing infrastructure. So one questions come from you named the product Jubilant Bhartiya's Domino's Pizza, and we are representing that, which basically says that how do we really improve the lab infrastructure and upgrading the analysis skill at the lab level in various states. And then there's a question that has come from Tata's consumer Kalyan Raman, which says that FSSAI has obviously evolved itself into a world-class regulator. One of the areas where we would like to see improvement is in the issuance of license, especially in the eastern zone. Currently, after a long wait for the license, the FBOs have to typically escalate the issue to the central authority, to your office, and they don't like doing it all the time. So is there any specific measures being taken there?
Okay. So about the lab infrastructure, I'm not very clear about what the question is, because in 2014, when this government came into power, I think we had about 65 notified labs in the country for food testing. Today, we have about 250 notified labs for food testing. And this includes public sector labs and private sector labs. So now all these labs, 250 labs which we have notified today, are NABL accredited. They're ISO 17025. So they're all good labs. And by all accounts, the feedback I receive from labs is that they're running short of samples and they have a problem surviving because there are too many labs. So as far as the number of labs is concerned, I would not really say there's a shortage. What we are looking at is the integrated assessment scope. There's something called integrated assessment. So for any food product, there's a number of parameters to be tested. If a lab is testing that particular product category, they should be capable of testing all the parameters which are required for that product category. Otherwise, their testing is not really satisfactory. They don't test all the parameters which are mandatory. So this is integrated assessment. So we are after labs now to go for integrated assessment. If they choose any category, then they should develop the wherewithal to perform all the tests which are required for that category. So that is integrated assessment. And we are now running after labs to do that. It is happening gradually. So that change you will see in the years to come. In the meantime, of course, for state food labs, we have a scheme, central sector scheme of 550 crore rupees, which is being implemented right now. We have already released about 400 crore rupees to labs. We provide high-end equipment to them. We provide microbiological testing facilities to them. In some cases, we've had to provide basic equipment also to them. So what we have done now is that there's a standard specifications for a basic food testing lab, which have been floated by FSSAI. They're available on our website. They include the equipment, they include the technical manpower, which is mandatory. They include the delegation of powers, which is required for financial purposes. They include the budgets which are required. Everything is there in those standard specifications. So we have gone ahead and carried out a gap analysis of all the state food testing labs. We engage an agency to do this. So they have gone to every state food testing lab, carried out a gap analysis and given us a report as to what is required. Now we are providing further funding beyond this 550 crores to these labs to take care of the gaps they have. The idea being that they should all come up to the basic requirements of a simple primary food testing lab. So that is being done for the private sector, for the public sector. For private sector, I would say the quality is reasonably good already. We are insisting on integrated assessment. We are also insisting on installation of LIMS in every lab information management system. And we have a network called InfolNet, which is the Indian network of food testing labs. So mapping onto InfolNet, ultimately what we want is that any sample which is tested, the report should automatically come to InfolNet. Nobody would have to upload it. So that is computerization, automation of processes. We are focusing on that also. But in terms of number of labs, we have about 250 ISO 17025 labs, which are begging for samples. The problem is that I have about 5 million food businesses are registered with me. Now, of these, about 700,000 are licensed food businesses. Every licensed food business is obliged to send all its products 2 times a year to some FSSAI notified lab for testing.
That's right.
Now, if everybody were to do this, then the number of samples is at least 14 lakhs a year. And it has to be much more because everybody is manufacturing more than one item.
More than one product, yeah, that's right.
So we are looking at 20, 25, 30 lakh samples per year going to 250 labs. It is not happening. So please help labs to upgrade themselves. If you provide business to them by voluntarily going for, not in fact, it's mandatory, by going for compliance testing, then they will all survive, they'll break even and more labs would come up. But
Right.
if they are not able to survive, then I think part of the blame has to lie on all of us together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, the third, so this question is around the import of food. So you've touched upon this a little bit, but what it says that, the import process is cumbersome. Would the import division ever consider relaxing the FBOs with the provisional NOCs to release the consignment on fast track basis in a parallel sampling and testing process can be completed on a time bound basis? The similar thing that we were talking about, that, having that sort of, trust between the FBOs and the FSSAI. Would that be a possibility, sir?
You see, for imports, we already have a RMS.
That's right.
So this may be very basic for many of you, but let me again, at the risk of sounding very boring, tell you that there's a ICE gate system managed by the customs, and every bill of entry is supposed to come into ICE gate. Once it goes to ICE gate, it automatically gets referred to a RMS for food purposes. Now, RMS would look at the commodity which is being imported, the manufacturer, the exporter, the importer, the clearinghouse, all these profiles, the violations which have taken place in the past, the failures of samples, testing reports, they look at all these things. And on the basis of all this analysis, automatically RMS identifies whether the product is to come to FSSAI or not. If it is to come to FSSAI, it comes to a system called FIX, Food Import Control System. Otherwise, it goes through the green channel. Now, last year, India imported 2 lakh food consignments. Of them, 41,000 came to FSSAI, which is about 20%.
20%, that's right.
So 80% of the food consignments which come to the country pass through the green channel. They don't come to us at all. That is number one. Number two, the samples which come to us in FIX, there the average clearance time, including the testing time, is around, today it stands at 110 hours. It was 125 hours earlier. It has come down to 110 hours, and we're still trying to reduce it further. So much so that FSSAI and FIX have been, circulated to all PGS as the model they are supposed to follow by the revenue department. They find that FSSAI's performance is the best, FIX is the best performing software, but some things can be actually done by the food businesses themselves or importers or clearinghouse agents. There's a facility to upload a bill of entry before the consignment arrives in the country, right? So if something has been dispatched, it is still on the high seas. It has not come to India at all. It will take 3 days to reach India. Even at that stage, documents can be uploaded. The bill of entry can be uploaded to IceGate. That is a very simple facility, but if you utilize that facility, then before the consignment lands here, you come to know whether it's to be sampled or it is not to be sampled. If it is not to be sampled, it's going through the green channel, you are aware of it, and this consignment goes straight away. If it is to be sampled, if it is being referred to FIX, then FSSAI officers have a chance to look at all the documents even before the consignment comes. So scrutiny of documents can be carried out online before the consignment lands. And then after the consignment comes, there's only visual inspection, sampling, and then the sample is sent for testing. So that is a simple facility which should be availed by everybody. I still find that this facility is utilized about 40% of the time, not more than that. So there are still 60% consignments where this facility is not availed. I would urge you to utilize this facility. The second is that we often get complaints and appeals about imports, and they provide a good opportunity to look at what is happening. So there are some cases, for food, testing is mandatory. So if a sample comes to us, it will be tested. That is something we can't do anything about. We can't simplify it. It has to be tested.
Sure.
And if there's a microbiological sampling testing involved, then it has to take 5 days. Again, I can't do anything about it. But there are steps which can be reduced. So one is that pre-arrival document scrutiny can take place. That can reduce the time required. The second is that if something was referred to us, then we used to test the samples, and for testing, some fees had to be deposited. So the consignment which was referred to us would require deposition of a fees. That also used to take a few hours, 5 hours, 10 hours, 8 hours, depending on the importer's performance. So for that, now we are going to replace this by a basic food import clearance fees, which should happen in 15 days or so.
Okay.
The ice skate modifications have already been made, which means that every food consignment which comes into the country, whether it is being tested or not, would end up paying some 4,000 rupees. It's a standard thing which would be paid by every consignment.
Mm-hmm.
And then if a particular consignment is chosen for testing in a lab, they would not have to pay anything extra. So this extra time required for payment of money would also be knocked off. I mean, I'm talking of a few hours in each step, because our average time is 110 hours. We want to bring it down below 100 hours.
True.
So each step is important. So that is another simple change which will help matters. But then when we look at specific cases, either it is a question of testing and failure on a few parameters, or saying that, well, there are worms inside this, I'll get the whole consignment clean, please allow me to get it clean and test it again. So then we, knowing that there are worms, we allow them, okay, remove the worms. So that kind of a thing happens. Or the broken percentage, we'll use it for some other purpose, it will not be used for food. Those instances are understandable because there's a problem with the food which is being imported. But there are some cases that I'm unhappy to share with you, where the CHA takes blank signatures of the importer, the persons who are importing the food stuff, and he has the gall or the presumptuousness to write anything on that piece of paper and then submit it to us. So this has happened in a few cases. In fact, even foreign embassies raised up these issues. And when we went into the details of it, we found something utterly nonsensical had been written and given to us, because of which the consignment was suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And then they confessed, yes, we had given a blank letterhead with our signature on it. So this is not the way. It is not like, and I'm sorry, there was a controversy earlier about questions being asked in the parliament like this.
That's
so
right.
we are not into that kind of a thing. Nobody can give a blank letterhead after signing it that you can write anything you want on my behalf. Please don't do that. That creates complications in a few cases. So we have a system of appeals wherein any consignment which is stuck up for any reason, an appeal can be filed. We look at the appeals and decide appeals. And then, of course, in the fix system that we have, there are reminders which are thrown up to us automatically. So if a consignment is getting delayed beyond 3 days or so, it is escalated. And the director imports will have a look at what is going on. Beyond 5 days, yes, all of us will look at it. The CLA, the import author, AO will have a look at it. The regional director will have a look at it. So there are some alarms which have been built into the system which come to us. So we keep on doing all this firefighting. But if you find that procedures are long or there's some problem, then we request you to be specific. Take the history of a few consignments, tell us what is happening. If you give us details and if you are specific, then we can trace what has happened, find out what has happened, and then set right systems. But a normal generic statement saying that, well, there are problems, can you set them right? This is neither here nor there. We can only take generic steps. So I'll tell you that we have reduced the time to 110 hours, we're doing this. I can only tell you generic things. But if there's some specific issue, we'll be extremely happy to look at it because we want to bring down the time which is required. We have now, in fact, gone to the extent of setting up a lab within the port of Mumbai in JNPT and within the port of Chennai, so that even these few hours which are lost in transit of the sample to the lab concerned can be saved. So we are doing everything which can be done. But if there's a problem, please give us specifics.
No, makes sense.
Now, about the issue of Eastern region licenses, well, we have a FOSCOS software, which is the same for the entire country. And there's auto generation of licenses, auto generation of registrations in that. So if there's no query, nothing happens for 8 days, then the registration is auto-generated. You don't have to wait for the registration to happen. It is auto-generated and issued. It is another matter that we keep on asking people later on, why was it auto-generated? There should not be so much auto-generated. But the software will give you a registration within 8 days if there's no query. Similarly, for a license, there's auto-generation on the 76th day. That is already taking place. But I don't really, we review the pendency of licenses in every state, in every region of the FSSAI, also central licenses also. The broad picture is the same in all the regions. And the norm that we have is that the total pendency of licenses should normally not be more than, let us say, 5% of the total number of licenses given last year. That is the kind of norm we follow, that we review people against this. And by and large, the situation is under control. So I don't find any particular difference in the eastern zone as compared to other zones. But if there's a problem, we'll be happy to help. You are free to disturb us. Don't feel shy about disturbing us. You're free to disturb us.
Thank you. So I want to be conscious of time. This is 5:37. Can we take another 5-7 minutes? Maybe close it.
Why not? Absolutely. I'm with you for as long as you wish.
Perfect. Perfect. So, okay. So the next question is around the animal feed, sir. As you know, again, this is another standard which has gone back and forth, and there's some interesting thing that is happening now, that in addition to the BIS standards and what's happening under the FSSAI, there are different states that are coming up with their own standards. Andhra Pradesh has come up with one, Odisha came up with one. And what's happening, there are different grades of feed, as you know, and grade 3 and grade 4, which was the most prevalent one, are the one which are actually suffering, and there are a lot of MSME who are actually the producer of that. Godrej can manage without grade 3 and grade 4, but especially in the MSME sectors, there's a big issue. So any comment on that, sir?
You see, animal feed is something that we do not have the power to regulate at all. We function under the Food Safety Act, and whatever powers we exercise are conferred upon us by the Act.
Sure.
Animal feed is excluded from our jurisdiction. We don't have any jurisdiction whatsoever on animal feed. Now, when you have concurrent jurisdiction of states and the center, there are things which are in the concurrent list. That's and right. Food regulation is in the concurrent list. Then the normal pattern is that standards made by the center would prevail. That each state should not have a different standard. And actual enforcement activities would be carried out by states. That is the general pattern. So as far as food standards are concerned, FSSAI standards prevail. No state will come out with any standard for food on their own. But we don't have any standards for animal feed, since we can't regulate animal feed. Now, animal feed does impact food.
That's right.
So to that extent, we are concerned about animal feed. If there are heavy metals in the animal feed, then they would be reflected in the meat which is being served to us. So they impact human food. And therefore, we want to regulate animal feed also. Either we should regulate animal feed or somebody else should regulate. But there's no regulator at the moment. So we have been taking up this topic with the Animal Husbandry Department and the Dairying and the Fisheries Department. And they said, no, they don't have the wherewithal to regulate animal feed. So their suggestion throughout has been that FSSAI should regulate animal feed also. And this is the general pattern followed all over the world. The food regulator does regulate feed also. Yeah, so we have proposed an amendment to the Food Safety Act. There are many amendments which have been proposed. This is one of the amendments, that animal feed also should be brought within the purview of FSSAI. And as far as the ministry is concerned, our health ministry and the health minister are concerned, they have approved of these changes. Now, of course, if you have to modify any act, you know the process. It will go to, there will be interministerial consultation, then the cabinet will take a call on it, then it will be introduced in the parliament as a bill, then it will go to a parliamentary standing committee and then be finalized. So it will take a long time, but we are moving in that direction. But until that happens, we have no powers to regulate animal feed. So what we have done is, I told you earlier that BIS standards are not mandatory until they are made mandatory by somebody else. Okay. So we have chosen that route.
Okay.
And we have said all the animal feed units, feed has to be purchased from units which are registered with BIS.
Yes, okay.
We made that mandatory. So there's no standard given by us as such, but we have said that BIS registration of animal feed units will be mandatory. That we have made mandatory. So BIS standards automatically start getting applied to animal feed manufacturers.
That's right.
Now, what Andhra Pradesh has done, you are saying, or any other state has done, well, they are sovereign states and they are free to do so. The industry can always go and tell them that there are BIS standards which are there before us and they've been made mandatory now. So there's no need for any different standards coming up from the state. Or if you want to have different standards, then they should be rationalized and harmonized with BIS standards. If you want us to intervene, we'll be happy to do that. We can write to the state government concerned. We can do that for you. But since there is a sovereign state government, there's a sovereign central government, and it's a subject in the concurrent list, therefore, nobody can exclude the possibility of the state government coming out with amendments. That can always happen. For instance, we say we'll ban the sale of loose edible oil, but then 3 states in the country said, no, we will allow the sale of loose edible oil. Now they have all come to the same agreement, and now there's no state which allows the sale of loose edible oil. But the state governments do have concurrent powers and they can do all this. So for feed, we don't have any powers. That is the short answer. And therefore, we have chosen to make BIS mandatory until the act is amended, until we can come out with our own standards. We'll follow that route.
Great. So we have there's a question on the edible oils, since you mentioned that. Are we looking at the definition of multi-source edible oil? There are blend oils which are with 2 edible oil seeds, and then there's something known as multi-source edible oil. This is a question that has come from Kargil.
Okay, so I don't really understand the question very much, because there was something which was called blended edible vegetable BEVO earlier.
That's right.
Then there was a apprehension that blending is taken to be adulteration by people. So there was a suggestion that the name is not a very nice one. So the suggestion was to change it to multi-source edible vegetable oil.
That's right.
So that was done in the regulations. Then people came ahead and said, look here, this is a very complicated name. Why call it a multi-sourced edible vegetable oil? Why not call it multi-sourced edible oil? That is quite sufficient, because nobody would have mineral oil for edible oil. So the last name is multi-source edible oil. So what was BEVO became MSEVO, then it became MSEO. That is now the nomenclature which is going to be followed from 1st of July is MSEO.
Okay.
So there's only, all these 3 are one and the same.
Okay.
But as far as the definition is concerned, it is very simple. We have always said that blending of 2 oils can take place, and none of the oil should be less than 20%. So you can't have an oil in which 1% is olive oil and the 99% is palm oil, and then you say this is blended olive oil. You write with the goodness of olive oil. You can't do that. Each one of the constituents has to be at least 20%.
To be called.
There can be 2 oils can be mixed together. That is the standard definition which is there in our. There are standards for all these things given in our regulations, and there's no confusion. If there's any confusion, I would like to know. Then we can clarify that.
Got it. So the last question, sir, before we go, this is a question. I mean, it says that this is a question from a consumer. The consumer actually sitting outside of India and enjoying the plant-based milk in various parts of the world, and they're saying that can the soya or the almond and those plant-based milk be called milk in India according to the Food Safety Authority's standard?
Yes. So there are some terms which are exclusively reserved for dairy.
Yes.
Milk is one of them. Yogurt is another. Dahi is also a term which is a dairy term. There's a list of these terms given in our regulation.
Okay.
Now these terms are exclusively reserved for dairy products. But the Food Authority can make an exception on the ground of some term having been in use for hundreds of years. Okay. Right? So there's only one exception which comes to my mind automatically, that is coconut milk. Coconut milk has been there for hundreds of years. It's been called milk. It's called milk all over the world.
That's right.
So in our regulations, a specific provision has been made for coconut milk. Although it is not dairy based, but coconut milk can be called coconut milk. But soya milk cannot be called soya milk. So any other plant-based product cannot be called milk, or no dairy terms can be used for them. So we take action, and therefore there have been cases where people have changed from soya milk to soya beverage. They have done that. Nobody has the power or the right to use a dairy term for a non-dairy product. Now, in addition to this, we are also now going to come out with milk logo. You have a vegetarian logo, non-vegetarian logo, vegan logo, Ayush Ahar logo, all kinds of logos are there. So the latest to join the bandwagon is the milk logo. It will be a light blue square in which there will be a white drop of milk.
Okay.
That can be used by only dairy products.
Okay.
So in the mind of the consumer, if you have the dairy logo, this milk logo on a product, it will be very, very clear that it is a dairy product. And along with this milk logo, if it is a dairy analog and you are substituting some part of the dairy by some non-dairy product or vegetable fats, then right below this you'll have to write it.
Okay. Okay.
It contains so many percent palm oil or vegetable fat. That will have to be written. So together the logo and the statement below it. If it's a pure milk product, there'll be no statement below it. But if there's some other thing which has been substituted for dairy component, it will be stated so on the front of the pack.
So they can display the logo with this with the
statement. The statement also has to come.
Okay.
Right. So if you're like, for instance, you have coffee chicory blend, then you write on the front of the pack, it's a coffee chicory blend, so that the consumer knows what it is. So this milk logo would come on the front of the pack. And if there's some non-milk, non-dairy component also, that will also have to be written on front of the pack along with the logo. So that will establish very clearly in the minds of the people whether some ice cream is again a dairy term. So if you are using the word ice cream, it cannot be anything else. Frozen dessert can be anything. But an ice cream cannot have any palm oil or any, theoretically they should not have any vegetable also in it, if you're calling it ice cream.
That's right.
So the milk logo will also add clarity. But the short answer is yes, dairy terms cannot be used for non-dairy products unless they are specifically allowed by FSSAI through a regulation.
Got it.
And let me hasten to add here that curd is not a dairy term. Curdling is a process for food products. So curd is not a dairy term. You can call something curd.
That's right. So thank you very much. Thank you for this such an interactive session. I can tell you, sir, in our history, probably this is one of the most interactive sessions we've had. So not doing the keynote address, you've actually put a lot of onus on me. I had to go through all the questions, and I was thinking that I could always, sneak out saying that there is no time left, and therefore I have not asked all the questions. So I'll be held for this by the members. But it was very, very extensive, extraordinary session. So thank you very much for your very honest and very candid conversation. What we can do, sir, going forward is we will really encourage our members to, you've given us confidence and courage that we can reach out to you, and you would love to be disturbed and your officers love to be disturbed, which, by the way, has been my experience, as I always mention to you, sir, all my life. And I hope that all our members take that away. So thank you for your time. Thank you for all the other officers who've joined the call. In fact, on the chat, we have been getting some answers in addition to what you were saying, sir. So not that we got the answers from you, but also from the FSSAI leadership team. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. On behalf of all the officers from FSSAI, let me say that it's been a pleasure to interact with all of you. As I said, we look forward to interactions and learning from you, understanding the problems which are arising in the field. So it's a great opportunity for us. And we look forward to many more such opportunities. I can never say no to you, Star Sir. If you come again for time again, then I'll have to concede again. I hope you don't come very soon. So we'll love to have such interactions in the future also. Thank you very much for the feedback that all of you provide.
Thank you very much, sir. Thanks for your time, sir. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Mittal. Thank you, Dr.